Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Our guest today is a two-time Super Bowl champion as an executive for the New York Giants. Spent a long time as a scout, director of college scouting, amongst other positions in the NFL. It's Marc Ross from the NFL Network, who's a part of their ongoing Path to the Draft coverage, leading us up to the NFL Draft first round on April 25th. Marc, thanks so much for your time, man. Welcome to the show.
Sure thing. My pleasure.
So I feel like I could go off script here, and we could talk about some of the other positions in this draft, and we'll get there. But this is Washington. We know where all eyes are. It is on that Thursday night, number 2 overall selection. So I will just ask very simply, if you are on the clock for Washington, Caleb Williams has gone off the board to the Chicago Bears. Who is your selection if you get to make the call at number 2 for the Commanders?
Running up to put that Jayden Daniels pick in there for sure. And I've been telling people this throughout the whole draft season that I think the gap between Caleb and Jayden is much closer than it is between Daniels and whoever the third person is. So I really love the guy. I love the production. I love the playmaking. I love the starts, the time he's played, the personality, the work habits, just his whole package. I just really love him, and I think he's been a star, won the Heisman, so he'll be able to take the full beating there of the DMV fan base there and be able to handle that. But I expected him to have some success, and I just love the guy.
So it does seem like there is, I don't want to say like a total split, because it's not unanimous, not consensus amongst former folks who actually worked or played in the league, and, I would say like media draft analysts, if you will, in terms of Jayden Daniels versus Drake Maye. But there does seem to be a lot more people in the league or formerly in the league that like Jayden versus some more like pure scouting and the media types who like Drake Maye. Why do you think that dichotomy is? And I guess more directly to posit this straight to you, like, what is it that you like so much about Jayden that puts him in that class closer to Caleb than Drake, where other people might favor other things?
Look, great quarterbacks in the league were really great quarterbacks their whole life. There's never that, well, he could be this, or he may develop into. Whenever you start maybeing and could being with particularly quarterbacks, but any player, then you got something wrong. You got to look at the tape, look at the film, and say, yep, this is our guy. He's the best player on the field. He's making big-time plays. He's raising the level of everybody else there. And that's what you want in a franchise quarterback, and a quarterback that you think can get you to the Super Bowl. My second draft was with the Eagles in 1999, and we had a group of quarterbacks there: Tim Couch, Donovan McNabb, Dante Culpepper, Achilles Smith, Cade McNown. There was a bunch of guys, but in my eyes, as a young scout, I was an area scout, I was like, Donovan was the guy. Like, you didn't have to guess. The guy did it his whole life. He produced. He was a big-time playmaker. He was from Chicago, so he could handle the whole situation in Philadelphia there with the media and the fans. So it wasn't could he do it? You saw him do it. And that's what I think with Jayden, is that he's carried this burden. He's carried this weight of being a playmaker and handling it perfectly. So I'm always going to go with the better player. I think he's a better, number one, just a better player than Drake Maye. He can do things that Drake Maye cannot do. He can do everything Drake Maye can do and do things he cannot do. And there's no, well, he could be. Yes, he'll get better, but there's not the games and stretches of his, particularly this year, where you're like, where's Jayden Daniels? And there's just too much of that with Drake Maye, of a lot of bad games and a lot of bad film that you're just trying to guess and say, well, he could get better at this. His accuracy could get better, his poise, his pocket presence. And to me, that's when you make mistakes with quarterbacks.
Marc Ross, NFL Network analyst, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. I think you've hit on the reasons why, even though I've waffled throughout this, I've ultimately landed on Daniels. And I think one of the biggest things that I am impressed with, Marc, is the leap he made from 22 to 23. At first was kind of a question mark, because you're like, did this guy just get old enough to figure out college football? And I think then you hear about the VR work he did and some of the time that he put in, and you go, oh, okay, that explains a lot. How can you explain to the audience kind of how not the film watching portion goes, but the scouting process where you watch the film and you have questions and then you talk to people and get answers, and how that process works from someone who's been in the positions that you've held in the league and how that applies to a guy like Daniels?
But you're just talking about his career progression and playing so well this year?
Well, the progression and then like kind of the information gathering that goes on that might explain certain things, such as you make this remarkable jump from 22 to 23 in his case.
Well, for him, this guy's played a lot of football. He started as a freshman at Arizona State, and you could see the talent. I mean, he just had a bad infrastructure there, not a whole lot around him. So you could actually see it there, just a skinny kid running around making plays. And then, of course, the COVID year, and then he exploded this year. And I think Joe Burrow is a good sort of measuring stick for him to say, yes, this can happen. You can be sort of a one-year superstar and at the same exact school, transfer, almost the same exact story. But what happens is when you evaluate, your area scouts they're grinding from August, training camp, just going to all these schools. So the Commanders have had their bevy of scouts that have been at Baton Rouge throughout the season, and then you get into the postseason with the combine and the meetings with Jayden and with your coaches and coordinator, and you talk to as many people as possible at LSU, at Arizona State, at his high school, and you're just trying to get a feel for the totality of Jayden Daniels on the field, in the classroom, in the film room, in the weight room, how he treats the equipment staff, the trainers. You're just gathering as much information as possible. And when you get the convergent validity on him and when everybody around him saying sort of the same things about his progression and his maturity and his growth, then you're saying, okay, we have a winner here. Now, if there's a bunch of different opinions and back and forth, then it's like, wait a minute, who is this guy? But with Jayden, it's sort of everything's the same, everything's positive, everything's led to him having this evolution as a player and a person. So really it's just about, number one, your area scouts set the tone as far as digging into the information, and then it expands there from your organization all the way up to your ownership group these final few weeks.
Yeah, that's such a good insight. Again, Marc Ross is our guest. He's been there. He's done that. Been a director of college scouting. He's part of the Giants front office that won 2 Super Bowls with us here on the Hoffman Show. So the other big question for Washington, Mark, once you get past quarterback at 2, is do you wind up trading back into the first round, possibly for an edge, but more likely for your left tackle of the future? They have those 2 picks at 36 and 40. And then they obviously have 67 and 78 as well, and 100 in the third round. Like, if they put a package of some of those picks together, how high up could they get? And are there linemen that you think could fall into the 20s that could be worth it?
Well, I think that with, number one, they're in an advantageous situation of having so many picks, and they have a ton of needs. So this is the year to have a lot of picks and a lot of needs. And I think there's this group of tackles that are pretty much going to be the same from maybe the mid-first round to the bottom of the second round, where there's this whole group of guys that I don't think there's this one or two. Joe Alt, I think maybe is just the class and a couple interior guys. But overall, there's a lot of different tackles with different skill sets, different positives, different negatives, a lot of developmental guys, I don't think there's anyone that's going to just step in right away next year except for Alt and say, yep, we feel confident with him. So for the Commanders, we can sit there at 36, we can be there at 40 and still get good players and still get the value of someone that we may take at 15, because I don't think there's that huge of a difference from the second tackle to the 10th tackle. There's that many guys and there's that much talent, and it's a good and bad, because I don't think there's that many surefire people that you're going the next year and say, go block Micah Parsons. You don't want that to happen. So they're in a good situation. I would use as many picks as possible for the Commanders, because I think they have a lot of needs that still need to be filled. So I would not sort of give that up because number one, the value and the need that they still have for a bunch of spots.
So we've talked to, obviously, you can imagine what our radio shows are like these days, talking to a million people about the same things from January until next Thursday. And we've certainly had a lot of people that I think agree on the not worth it to trade. You're the first guy I've heard, though, to say that there's not a big difference in, like, once you get past alt. So for you, the tier is kind of alt, and then it's the next group with Fashanu and all kind of the Fuagas who might be tackles, might be guards, the Graham Bartons of the world, all the way down to guys like Patrick Paul, Roger Rosengarten. Those guys are all kind of could be hit or miss guys for you.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of, and I got Fatanu as a guard. I think he's day one guard, Pro Bowl player. Jackson Powers Johnson. The interior guys, I think, are real ready to go. Than the tackle. So if you want to consider Fatanu a tackle, then yeah, he's ready to go. But I think he might have some growing pains at tackle. But as a guard, could be a Pro Bowl guard. Yes, as far as and even Graham Barton's an inside guy. I don't see him as a tackle. You're going to be in trouble if he's a tackle. So when you're just looking at Jordan Morgan and J.C. Latham, and you mentioned Fashan, these guys have a lot of development still. They have a lot of holes. They aren't just I don't feel confident in their skill set and development right now that they'd be day one starters or year one starters, and you feel confident that they would get out there and produce at a high level. There'll be a lot of growing pains, and will they be better? If you take any of them, will they be better than what you have on the roster now and say, they could start, or do you want a veteran in there just to say, okay, you can get us through, and you won't get beat down mentally if you get beat so much. So, yeah, I think there's a big group of tackles that will be at the disposal of the Commanders even into the second round.
So that kind of hits, Mark, on something that I'm curious how much you thought about as a front office executive and how much you think about now as an analyst, which is the idea of getting it right versus making it right. Because I think quarterback is a great example of this between Washington and New England. I actually feel confident that if the infrastructure that Washington has in place and how they're running their franchise, that if they draft Jayden, Drake, or J.J. McCarthy, that they can make any of those guys right. And that with where New England is at right now, I look at that situation and I go, oh, buddy, whoever goes there is going to struggle because they just don't have the infrastructure set up for anybody to succeed. How much of that did you guys think about in the front offices you worked in versus, obviously you're trying to select the best player for you, but maybe you watch a guy go somewhere else and you go, I don't know if that's going to work there. And the idea of making it right with what you do and how you run your organization versus quote unquote getting it right, like all these players' success is preordained no matter where they go.
Well, I think there are certain players, certain quarterbacks that would be good no matter. Andrew Luck, you could have dropped him in any situation, and he was going to be a star. But I think the infrastructure and the foundation doesn't make a quarterback great. It just takes away the burden of having to be great all the time. So when you have that, some of these guys are going to bust. We're talking about all these guys, and they're going to be busts. There's going to be maybe one or two that are really good. There's going to be maybe an average guy, and there's going to be a couple busts. So I know every draft season we go in, and all 5 or 6 quarterbacks are all going to be Pro Bowlers, and that's just not the case. But rinse and repeat. We do it every draft season. So there's reasons why some guys just aren't good enough, even with a good foundation, and they're just not built for the NFL, don't have the skill set. So do the Commanders have a better situation than the Patriots? Sure. But you mentioned those 3 guys, let's just say Maye, Daniels, and JJ, but that doesn't necessarily mean all 3 are going to be successful if they're in Washington. I think there's going to be levels of talent. They're different talents individually. They have, different makeup mentally. So I think, yes, the situation can help them, but at the essence, stars are going to be stars, average guys are going to be average, and busts are going to be busts. The situation just sort of accelerates what they're going to be if it's a good situation.
Interesting. Marc Ross with us for another minute or two here on the Hoffman Show. So that 36th and 40th pick, Mark, obviously offensive tackle is probably going to be the prime position that Washington is attacking. I think edge and wide receiver and corner are the other ones. We can run quickly through all 3 of those. Is there kind of a second-tier edge player that you like for Washington that you think would be a good fit in what we know as a Dan Quinn defense, even if we know they're going to change it with Joe Witt and company a little bit here in D.C.?
Yeah, they just got to get good players. They just can't force and say we need because you mentioned how many positions for, and we can go through
right.
a few more that they need. They need a couple quarters. They need O-line. They need another receiver. Wouldn't be too bad either. With help Terry out. I know they got Dotson, but he's okay and made the signing. But you can't trot Cleveland Farrell out there as your starter. So there's a lot of needs and positions that they need. So I would think Adam Peters right now and Dan Quinn are not forcing and say, we have to take this here and we have to take this there. They can really truly be, let's take the best value. Let's position these players on the draft board of, okay, these are our specific needs, but these are the best players. And we have so many picks that we can really rebuild on the fly like that. So, that being said, guys like Marshawn Nealon from Western Michigan, Braylon Trice from Washington, those are interesting, intriguing guys there at the top of the second that I would think would be in the mix for the Commanders.
And then at wide receiver, everyone's got the top three, or I shouldn't say everyone. There are certain people that have, Brian Thomas Jr. or whoever else, higher on Odunze, lower on Harrison, whatever. But outside of the mostly consensus top three guys, how deep is your next tier of wide receivers?
Well, I think this is the receiver group. I think is very similar to the tackle group, where there's a lot of players and there's a deep group that you can get into the second round. And it mentioned A.D. Mitchell from Texas, and my favorite player is Xavier Legette from South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I think he is going to be a star, and I don't understand why he's not being talked about with that group of guys you just talked about. And big, fast, powerful, a grown man. He is a grown man, and someone like a Jermaine Burton from Alabama, who is extremely skilled and explosive. So Xavier Worthy, who ran the fastest 40 ever, he has this particular skill set that you have to work around. But there are a lot of intriguing players there. Ladd McConkey in the mix. So a lot of intriguing players and receivers into the second and the third round. And as the Puka Nacua showed last year, you can go deep and find a star if you're looking for the right player.
Who's the player you like in this draft way more than everyone else? Is it Legette?
Xavier. I just mentioned Legette. I mean, whenever we have shows and we talk about the underrated guy, he's the one. He's the one for me.
And last but not least, then the inverse of that. Who's the guy that everyone likes that you're like, I don't see it. It's not for me.
Oh, easy. Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is,
okay.
He's there's this guy every year, and I learned that when I started out as a scout. You always stick with your convictions. Doesn't matter if the whole room and the whole world is going against what you think. Stick with your convictions, and it's just I don't see this special, unique talent. I think he has some limitations. I think Georgia does a wonderful job of scheming him open. He cannot block. He is not a good blocker. I don't care what anybody else says. He's not a good blocker.
Even the people that like him will tell you that's not why they like him.
Yeah. So, he's just not gifted to compensate for that. So he's my guy. We'll see what happens. I said prior to the draft season and the workout season that he would be disappointing in the workout, and he did not work out. So I think he kind of knew that as well. So I got a little feather in my cap as of now, where I was talking to the colleagues saying, I told you, he's hiding something. So we'll see how it all pans out with Brock Bowers.
For sure. One of the most interesting players in the first round, too, because depending on where he goes, that could start. Like some of the teams that will consider him also considering tackle. So when does that tackle run start? Going to be fun to watch. And, of course, for all of this coverage leading up to the draft, make sure you check out Marc Ross on NFL Total Access and Path to the Draft, weeknights on NFL Network. Marc, this was great. Really appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Sure thing. Anytime.
That is Marc Ross, NFL Network analyst, two-time Super Bowl champion, with us here on The Hoffman Show. And, again, live coverage of the NFL Network. Path to the Draft, 6 p.m. Eastern, and Total Access, 7 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday this week, with exclusive updates leading up to the NFL Draft, which does air on NFL Network. When we get back here on The Hoffman Show, the Wizards season is finally, mercifully, over. We will have our post-mortem. Anthony's got some key questions for me, and we'll take some calls on this Wizards season that never really got off the ground. Next, here on The Hoffman Show.
Hey, this is D.A., and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.